Should I stretch and try to use input at a higher level in order to make myself stronger? I'm Joseph. This is Input English. Today, let's talk about matching the level of the input that we consume versus our level of skill in the language. For those of you joining us for the first time, Input English is a channel created to provide comprehensible input for people who want to improve their listening comprehension and their speaking ability in English. I've said many times that comprehensible input is by far the best way to learn English. So let's get started with our topic for today, and that is matching the level of input to our level of skill. Should I stretch? Should I try more difficult material in order to make myself stronger? In athletics, this same question comes up. Should I use heavier weights? Should I train on hills? Should I push myself beyond what I thought I could do in order to gain strength or endurance? Should I struggle a bit in order to get something for my added efforts? If you research this topic and you go to reputable sources of information on comprehensible input, the most common recommendation is that we should consume content that is easy for us to understand. The guidance that we get is we should not worry about understanding every word, but we should know most of the words so that when we consume the content, we understand the story or we understand the discussion. We can follow it. This is really the way comprehensible input works best. Recommendations on how much you should understand vary with the speaker. Many recommendations suggest that we should know 98% of the words. Others hedge that a bit and suggest that the range should be perhaps 95 to 98%. Now, this is in stark contrast to what we learned in school. In school, we were presented with material we did not know, and we didn't know 98% of the material. We knew virtually none of the material, and then we had to claw our way through that learning process. So in school, we learned to struggle. We learned to study. We learned to memorize. But we have to remember, in school, we were preparing our performance on a test. In a discussion with college students preparing for a big organic chemistry test, they are not talking so much about remembering this material 10 years from now. They are concerned about their ability to get an A or a B or a C, or maybe just a passing grade on the upcoming test, which is tomorrow. The picture I'm trying to paint is that for most of us, our schooling, although very useful to us and a very positive thing for us, did not necessarily position us well to understand comprehensible input. Comprehensible input was not taught in any school that I ever attended. As a musician, I frequently find myself interested in playing a piece of music that is above my level of proficiency. And depending upon how big that gap is, I may be able to stretch and learn it, or the difference between my proficiency and the demands of that piece of music may be so great that it's unrealistic to try to learn that at the present time. You will likely find that same phenomenon showing up in your language learning. There may be a piece of literature or some video content that you would really like to consume, but as you examine it, you start realizing it's above your level of proficiency, and it's going to put a lot of demands on you. So let's look at the advantages and disadvantages of stretching to a higher level than we ordinarily would. Stretching for more advanced content gives you more content. It gives you access to more material to consume, so that's an advantage right there. It can also give you access to input that you desire. You're interested in the subject matter. You're interested in acquiring the information contained in the content, or you want to enjoy a famous, beautiful piece of literature, so your passion may drive you to stretch a bit. That passion is useful in language learning. As our language proficiency increases, we get to a point where we can have our content do two things at one time. That is, it can be comprehensible input to help us improve our English skills, but it can also give us valuable information that's available in English. So this double duty is language learning and knowledge acquisition at the same time. So what are the downsides of stretching above our usual level of input? Number one, frustration. If you start a new video or a new work of literature and you are trying to understand it, and you find that you don't know enough words that you can actually follow the story, it may be very frustrating for you to have to stop and look up a word and then continue. Soon you have to stop, look up a word, and continue. And as I describe this, you would see that it's not very efficient. My big concern here is frustration. Language learners don't need frustration. It's not helpful. Frustration doesn't make us stronger. All of us acquiring a new language are concerned about the massive amount of time that it takes to accomplish what we want. We're talking about thousands of hours of input. And if our input is acquired in a very inefficient way, then we don't get much benefit per unit time spent. Because time is a valuable commodity and it is not unlimited in anyone's life, efficiency is important to most of us. Using more advanced input that requires us to stop and look up words further degrades our efficiency because of this stop-start cadence. Studies on learning show that if you interrupt your train of thought, you interrupt your focus, change subjects to another task, and then come back to it, it takes you quite a bit of time to get back in the groove, to get back into that rhythm of acquiring more language. So you get a double dose of inefficiency if you're looking up a lot of words. Another downside of stretching to material that is too advanced for our level of proficiency is it can create doubts in our mind. It can cause us to doubt our abilities, and it may cause us to doubt the ability of comprehensible input to work for us. Ideally, if we are using comprehensible input to acquire the English language, we should not be steeped in doubts about ourselves or doubts about the method we call comprehensible input. We do not want to hold ourselves up to an unrealistic standard and then let that create doubts about our own abilities. Much of my experience in formal education in schools was focused on the idea of delayed gratification. I would go through all this study of these subjects year after year so that I would get something good many years in the future. That's a common experience for people in school. With comprehensible input, we are far better off if we can put together a program that we find enjoyable at the present time while we're acquiring the language. One of the most certain ways to fail to learn a language or to fail to improve one's language is to sour on the process and then give up. This is not something I accuse you of. This is something that happened to me in the past many times. This is the key feature, the key difference between my experience with comprehensible input as compared to all the methods I used over many decades to try to learn various languages. In the past, my final and most effective mode of failure that I ever discovered was quitting. The one thing that I have not done with comprehensible input learning Spanish is quit. I've kept on going, day after day, week after week, month after month. And that not quitting is super important. So if we sour on the process because we find it unpleasant and we're trying to reach a goal someplace in the future, we're at risk to quit. Those are the thoughts that I go through as I look at new material. Remember, this is a new educational experience for us. In school, everything that we consumed was prescribed by the school. With comprehensible input, you can find resources that prescribe the input and curate it for you. That's actually one of the things I'm trying to do with this channel, is curate a collection of videos so that you can go through and get a lot of input that you may find very useful. But this channel isn't enough for you. And so as you go out and look for content, you have to make these decisions every day. With literature in English, you may run into a couple of reasons that the material seems difficult. One is it may have been written 200 years ago, and the style of speech or the style of writing is very different than present-day English. Another difficulty you may run into is flowery, poetic language that is frequently found in great literature. I frequently will audition input. That is, I will take a sample of it and see how it feels. Can I understand it? Frequently, one has to decide whether we want to read it or consume it as an audiobook. Literature is readily available in audiobook form, and you may find that easier than the reading, or vice versa. I don't have a one-size-fits-all recommendation for you on whether you should stretch for more advanced material. I wouldn't do it for a misguided sense that it will make you stronger. I would stretch to more advanced material if you are drawn toward it, if it beckons you and you really want to do it. If your extra effort is driven by passion, then you're on solid ground. If it's based on a sense of duty to work harder, then I would advise you strongly against trying to stretch, because you're going to be much more efficient if you can understand most of the words and all of the story. Now, these decisions we make about content are just made at a point in time. And if you say to yourself, this is too advanced, I'm not going to consume this now, that does not mean that you won't ever consume it. Perhaps in 6 months, you'll be ready for it. The best studies that we have on comprehensible input suggest that we should indeed know most of the words and be able to follow the story very well. That's the sweet spot for us being very efficient in our learning and using our time properly. I invite comments below, and if you like videos like this, be sure to click on this one next. See you soon.